Hi guys, welcome back. We are here to continue the Gingerbread Bakery and we're almost done. I don't think we have much left. And Laurie Gilmore, of course, is an amazing author. This is our second book in book club that we've read. And we left off on chapter 28, page 243. Let me get a thumbnail real quick. Okay. Now, so much for being the big spoon, Max said, tugging Annie's arm tighter around his waist. Her fingers flexed, pressing into his skin. He could feel her groan rumble through his back, and he laughed. Damn it, she said, pulling away. Where are you going? He asked, rolling over to face her. That was cozy. Annie rolled her eyes, but she was smiling, and Mac thought this was his favorite morning in a long time. What time is it? She asked, and Mac glanced at his alarm clock. Just after 6, he said, thanks to the tilt of the earth that made December so grim in the northern hemisphere, it was still dark in his bedroom, although the streetlights hitting the snow outside gave the room an eerie glow. He could make out Annie's gentle smile in her sleepy eyes, her gaze soft. For now, she wasn't scowling at him. He liked it a lot. We should check on the kittens, she said, even as she pulled the blankets up higher around her shoulders, clearly not intending to get up anytime soon. Already did. Mac pointed to the side of the bed where he'd brought up the box in the middle of the night. Got worried about them downstairs all alone, he explained. Annie bit down on another smile. You really have to stop doing that, she said. Doing what? Being sweet. I am sweet. That caused a little crease to form between Annie's eyebrows. She still didn't believe him. She still wanted to cling to her image of him as the villain. What do you think of me now? He asked, echoing the question they'd asked each other all those years ago. Annie sighed. I'm not really sure anymore. He'd take it. Anything was better than her thinking of him as the asshole who broke her heart. Okay, biggest fear, he asked instead. That I like this a little too much, she admitted, and hope flared in Mac's chest. What about you, biggest fear? That you'll never forgive me? The crease between her eyebrows deepened. What do you think of me now? She asked. Mac paused, taking her in, her bedhead and her sleepy face peeking out above his covers. He needed to get this exactly right. I think you're just as bright as when I left. I think you hold this town and your friends and your family together. I think you are still an overachiever, but I think it's made your dreams come true, and I think you're even more beautiful than the last time we did this. Annie held his gaze, not speaking, and Mac felt the world stand still as he waited. He'd wait for Annie forever. That was pretty good, she said, after so long that Mac thought maybe she'd never answer. He couldn't help but chuckle. She was never going to make this easy for him, but he didn't deserve easy, so that was okay. Favorite movie? She said. The Muppet Christmas Carol, he said without missing a beat. Annie's laugh filled the quiet room. That cannot possibly still be your favorite movie, she said. It absolutely can, she countered. You're ridiculous, she said, her nose crinkled in disbelief. So what's yours then? Has it changed in the past 11 years? It's been a while since I've even had time to watch a movie, she said. All I really seem to have the bandwidth for at the end of the day is reality TV. Really? And you're going to make fun of me for loving the Muppets? There's something relaxing about watching other people blow up their lives. At some point, she reached out a hand beneath the blankets and was toying with the gold chain he still wore around his neck. What was the best place you lived? She asked, her fingers still looped through his necklace. He willed her to tug him closer. I liked any time I was on the coast. Santa Barbara was cool. I really liked Chicago, too. She wanted to ask him more, he could tell, but she hesitated. The only sound in the room was her light breathing and the slow slide of his cross along the chain. Go ahead, he said. I know you want to ask. He'd been waiting for her to ask. He'd been waiting years to explain. Annie's lips tipped into a frown, and it took all his strength not to lean forward and kiss it off. Okay, fine, she said, like she'd made a decision, like she was ready to meet the challenge he laid out for her. Why didn't you come back? Why did you leave me sitting in the diner waiting for you like an idiot? He knew the question was coming, and yet somehow he hadn't been prepared for how much it would hurt to hear it out loud. He wasn't prepared for all the hurt she'd say it with. I did come back, he said, and Annie scoffed. Oh, you must have been invisible that day. She dropped the chain. Max sighed. I did come back, and I saw you sitting in the booth, and I couldn't do it. Annie rolled away from him, but he saw the tears in her eyes before she did. Damn it. He was screwing this up. He had to make her understand. I saw you sitting there, and I had been gone for an entire year, Annie, and I still knew nothing. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do. I was 20 years old, and I was still lost, and I saw you sitting there, and what could I possibly have had to offer you? He remembered it like no time had passed at all. The feeling of looking through the diner window and seeing Annie sitting there, so poised and perfect. He thought about her the whole time he'd been gone, but seeing her again in real life had made him doubt everything. It made him doubt his memories. It made him doubt himself. He'd been miserable the first year he'd been away, but he'd done it to prove something to himself, to his family, that he could be on his own, that he could figure out his own life, and he hadn't figured out shit. He came home feeling like a failure. How was he supposed to walk up to Annie feeling like that? What was he supposed to say? I'm back, but I'm still the same loser that left here a year ago? He couldn't do it. Annie sat up abruptly, taking half the blankets with her, leaving Mac in the cold. You didn't have to offer me anything. You only had to show up. Mac sat up to face her on the bed. I was scared, he said, desperate for her to understand. He knew he didn't have to offer Annie anything concrete, but he at least needed to offer her some version of himself that he was proud of. I was scared that I wouldn't be what you remembered or what you wanted me to be. Annie shook her head. I sat there waiting for you all day. I felt like a complete fool, like some stupid lovesick girl who waits an entire year for a boy. I never wanted to be that girl, and I haven't been her since. She got up, taking the blanket with her, looking around his room for her clothes. This is why I can't do this with you, Mac. We can't do this again. You made me feel that way once, and I won't let you do it again. And what about you? He said, getting up and following her around the bed, even as the voice in his head was screaming at him to retreat. That was not how this was supposed to go. He was taking his one chance to fix things with Annie and ruining it. But he couldn't stop. If they had any chance of having a fresh start, they needed everything out in the open. I'm not the only one to blame in all of this. Excuse me, Annie said, her eyes going wide. What are you talking about? He'd had no intention of ever bringing this up, but now years old hurt bubbled to the surface. I chickened out the day we were supposed to meet, but I came to Brandon White's party on New Year's Eve. Annie froze, the blanket wrapped around her shoulder. What are you talking about? She whispered. Max stalked closer until they were toe-to-toe. I came to that New Year's Eve party looking for you. I had spent the week trying to figure it out, and I realized that it didn't matter what I was doing with my life. I knew you'd want to see me anyway. I knew we had something special. That's what he convinced himself of anyway, that he could trust Annie to want him even if he was still incomplete. He'd gone to that party ready to apologize for standing up, but also so fucking hopeful that she'd forgive him, that they could finally pick up where they'd left off. Annie swallowed hard. I didn't see you at the party. You didn't see me because you were too busy. He stepped closer until Annie had to tip her face up to his. Do you remember what you were busy doing that night, Annabelle? He asked, his voice a low rumble, every feeling he'd had when he'd seen her that night barreling back into him. Annie faced him head on like she always had. Yes, I do. I spent that night forgetting you. Wow. Chapter 29, then. Annie's second plate of pancakes was already cold. She'd given up looking busy about an hour ago and was now just starting forlornly into space, staring. It was December 23rd, the day she and Mac had agreed to meet back at the diner, nearly 1 year after Mac had taken off on his cross-country adventure. Annie had waited for this day with unrestrained excitement. She had 24 gingerbread cookies in a tin in her bag that she couldn't wait to give him. She barely sat still in the last 2 weeks. She'd imagined being here in this booth with Max so many times. It was hard to believe it hadn't already happened. She pictured them laughing and talking. She wanted to hear all about Mac's travels, about where he'd gone and what he'd seen, the things he liked best and the things he hated. She wanted to know if he was happy to be back home and if he was going to stay and if he had gotten what he wanted out of the trip. She was so freaking excited just to see his face again, and she really hoped she would get a chance to kiss it again. All month, she'd been nearly jumping out of her skin with anticipation. Mac had sent postcards over the year like he promised, but Annie had kept up her end of the deal too. She hadn't wanted to hold him back. They'd done a little bit of texting and they'd only spoken on the phone once when Mac called to wish her a happy birthday. But she'd wanted him to have his year on the road. She didn't want to ruin that for him. But maybe that had been a bad idea. Maybe over the course of this year, Mac had turned back into a fantasy. Maybe Annie had blown their weeks together way out of proportion. Maybe Mac was as big of an asshole as she had always thought. Just because he was nice to her for a few weeks last year, and just because he had sent her a few postcards, didn't mean there was anything serious between them. Clearly there wasn't, because he hadn't even bothered to show up. She checked her phone one last time. She had 2 texts from Hazel about meeting up later. One from her mom to grab eggnog on her way home, and that was it. No, sorry, I got caught in traffic. No, I can't make it today. No, not even a forget the whole thing, I'm not coming back. Nothing but radio silence from Mac. Annie had restrained herself and sent only a single text to him. A simple, I'm in our usual booth. And now she hated that she had sent it. Their usual booth, like this, was something they had done all the time when it had just been just a few weeks. Here she was acting like they were something when clearly they were nothing. Over the course of the afternoon, waiting for Mac, she'd pretty rapidly gone through the stages of grief. Denial. She'd spent the first half hour questioning whether this was the right day and the right time. Then thinking that obviously something had gotten in his way of showing up. He wouldn't stand her up. Anger. After another hour had passed, Annie was blindingly angry. How could she have been so stupid to believe that this boy had changed? She'd known him forever and she'd never liked him. Why had she let him trick her? And why the hell hadn't he even bothered to break up with her like a man? Bargaining. All she wanted was to see him one more time, mostly so she could throw her drink in his face. That always seemed satisfying in the movies. If she could only have that chance, then she would let it all go. And now she had settled somewhere between depression and acceptance. She figured if she gave it another half hour or so, she could move on and live a fairly normal life. After all, he was just one stupid boy. There would be others, hopefully some that were less stupid, some that would actually come when they said they were going to. Annie was relatively certain that eventually she would meet someone that didn't make her feel as devastated as Max Sullivan had made her feel. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Maybe she wasn't as close to acceptance as she thought. You almost done here, hon? Gladys asked, coming up to her table for the 10th time today. The diner was closing soon. Annie really needed to go. Yeah, I'm sorry, Gladys. I'm just about done, Annie said, trying to hide her sniffling. Unfortunately, Gladys didn't buy it. She slid into the seat across from Annie, wisdom and sympathy on her face. It's a boy, isn't it? She said, and Annie hated that. Hated that the go-to thought was that a boy had made her cry. Didn't matter that it was true. She just hated it. Like, what else would make a girl cry? She couldn't think of 100 other things to cry about that were much more worthy than one stupid boy. She wiped her eyes again. Actually, I'm pretty torn up about the polar ice caps melting, she said, rolling her shoulders back. She would be damned if she ever got caught crying over a boy again. She certainly would never cry over Macaulay Sullivan again. Today would be the last day that Annie let Mac have any sway over her emotions. She swore it to herself. Gladys smiled. Good for you, she said, like she knew they weren't talking about polar ice caps at all. She patted Annie's hand on the table. You're a strong girl. You'll be all right. With that, she got up, leaving the check behind, charging Annie for only 1 order of pancakes instead of 2. Annie paid the check, leaving the gingerbread cookies as a gift for Gladys, and marched out of the diner. She was proud of herself when she didn't even glance around her parking lot to see if maybe a certain car was pulling in. She was determined that this was the last bit of energy she would give to a certain someone. She was going to move on with her life. She was going to find better people to spend her time thinking about. She glanced down at her watch. 5:24 p.m. on December 23rd would be the last time she would think about Mac in their perfect month and all the feelings she thought she'd had about it. Clearly, she'd been wrong. Mac had used her, he'd lied to her, and he'd ditched her. Frankly, she should have seen it from the start, and this was exactly how he would behave. Mac was used to getting what he wanted, and she was just one more person that fell for his charm. Even as she thought it, it felt like a betrayal of the Mac she had gotten to know. She thought she had gotten the truth of him, but apparently she'd been wrong all along. Mac's hands were sweating despite the fact that it was freezing outside. He was standing outside of Brandon's house between an inflatable Santa and an enormous working snow globe, steeling himself to go in. A few partygoers wandered in and out of the house, and there were plenty of cars parked in the quiet cul-de-sac, but so far the party seemed pretty mellow compared to some he'd been to in high school. Hopefully that meant it'd be easy to find Annie inside. Her sister had said she'd be here, and Charlotte seemed to know everything about her older sister, so Mac trusted her intel. He knew he'd screwed things up. He knew Annie would be pissed at him, but he was still holding on to a strange sort of hope that she would be happy to see him, that she would forgive him, and they would go back to how things were last year. Last year, when Annie had warmed up his frozen fingers with her fuzzy mittens, when she'd kissed him, when she'd smiled at him, he wished he could go back. He wanted to tell her that most of those postcards he'd sent had come from his first 2 months on the road. He'd spread them out to send them to her, but most of his traveling was done by March. He'd spent a lot of the year in a shitty motel not that far from Dream Harbor, just waiting out the time, waiting to come back, bartending at bars that weren't his father's. It had been a waste of time. It was probably why he still felt like he was lost. He'd been too embarrassed to come back sooner, even though he probably should have. It was why he hadn't gone into the diner, why he'd been too embarrassed to see her again, but he had to, even if it was just one more time. Even if it was just so she could tell him that she didn't want to pick up where they left off. He needed to hear it. He needed to know if the memories were real, if things between them really had been as magical as he remembered. He blew out a long breath, watching it cloud the night air. It was now or never. He couldn't start a new year without knowing where he stood with Annie. He walked into the house, heading to the back, following the sounds of the party. There were plenty of familiar faces, people that had stuck around in town, and some new ones. Honestly, he was surprised Annie was at this party. It didn't seem like her kind of thing. The thought caused a little seed of doubt to plant itself in his gut. Maybe he didn't know her that well after all, or maybe she had changed. Sorry guys, I had to continue in the car. It got too loud. Okay, we left off at the top of page 257. The thought caused a little seed of doubt to plant itself in his gut. Maybe he didn't know her that well after all, or maybe she had changed in the past year. He made his way to the kitchen where the drinks were laid out. He helped himself to one of the ubiquitous red cups, scanning the party for the one person he was looking for. His heart kicked him in the ribs. She was here. Annie, the girl he'd been dreaming about for a year, was here, looking as gorgeous as she did when he left. She was here, and she was real, and she was smiling, a rosy blush on her cheeks. Mac nearly swallowed his tongue at the sight of her tucked into the corner of the couch, her attention on something out of Mac's line of sight. She looked happy. Mac hesitated. Maybe he should leave her alone. Maybe he'd been right at the diner, and she was better off without him hanging around. But then her smile grew, her face lighting up, and the Christmas lights lit up her blonde hair just like they had that night. He had to talk to her, to apologize at least. He took a step in her direction and froze when he noticed the arm draped over her shoulder and the dude it was attached to staring at her like he'd won a prize. Who the hell was that guy, and why was Annie looking at him like that? She laughed at something the guy said, and Mac was unprepared for the immediate flash of rage coursing through his body. Why the hell was she laughing at that guy like that? Why was he touching her? Mac had been wildly wrong about how this evening was going to go. He figured Annie would be mad at him or upset. He had never once considered the fact that she'd be here with someone else. He needed to talk to her, but before he could get 2 steps away from the kitchen counter, it was Logan who he came face to face with. "What are you doing here?" he asked gruffly, as if Mac had offended him in some way. "I need to talk to Annie." Mac tried to move around Logan, but the guy moved to block him. He was bigger than Mac remembered. Apparently lifting hay bales was a great workout. "I don't think you do," Logan said. "What the hell, man? Get out of my way. I need to talk to her." Logan stepped in front of him again, doubling down. "She's clearly busy right now. You can talk to her tomorrow." Mac felt frantic at this suggestion. He couldn't wait another day. He couldn't start another year without her. "I need to talk to her now." Logan shook his head. "What's your problem?" Mac asked, straining his neck to see around Logan. It had been a while since he'd been in a fight, but tonight seemed like a good time to get back into it. The guy with Annie had moved even closer, and her face tipped up to his. Mac wanted to scream. He knew what it felt like to be on the other side of that look. He wanted to be back there. I don't know what's going on with you two, Logan said, voice low, but this is what I do know. Annie's been weird all month. I've known her for a long time, and I know she's been keeping something from me. And then you get back to town, and she gets really sad. I don't like it when my best friend is sad. Sad. Why hadn't he considered that Annie would be sad? What are you talking about? I didn't do anything. Logan shrugged. I didn't say you did. All I said was you got back, and she got sad, and I don't know why. But I don't like you being here right now, and I don't like the way you're acting. You can text Annie tomorrow, and she can decide if she wants to talk to you. Mac opened his mouth to argue further, but stopped when he saw Annie get up. A small bit of hope sparked and then immediately died when he saw the guy was still with her, their fingers intertwined like she was leading him somewhere. No, not somewhere. She was leading him upstairs, and Mac had been to enough house parties to know what that meant. Shit, Mac whispered under his breath, and Logan turned too. Annie had stopped a few stairs up, smiling. She leaned down and kissed that guy, her hand sliding through his hair, and it was like Mac could feel it on his own head. Could remember the taste of her tongue on his own, and now this guy, this nobody, got to have it, and Mac hated it. His fist curled at his sides, the urge to fight rearing back up again. Looks like she already forgot about whatever was making her sad, Logan said as they watched Annie lead that guy upstairs. For a split second, Mac considered following her. He imagined pulling that guy away from her and dragging her out of here. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to rip his heart out and lay it out at her feet. But apparently Annie didn't want that. She'd already forgotten about him. He made one mistake and she'd moved on, just like that. A humorless laugh escaped him. Yeah, I guess so. Logan almost looked sympathetic when he turned back around, but not like he was going to give in and let Mac charge past him. Not that it mattered. Mac had lost the urge. Going to be back in town long? Logan asked. After all these months away, waiting to come back, Mac knew there was only one answer. No, I'm leaving again tomorrow. Logan's eyebrow rose. There isn't anything here for me, Mac said, and Logan answered with a frown like he might disagree, but Mac didn't want to hear it. He strode out of the party, vowing to himself to not waste another minute thinking about Annabelle Andrews. It was time he did this traveling thing for real, and this time he'd have no one waiting for him back home. This time he'd have no trouble staying away. Chapter 30. Now. Mac flinched when she said it, like her words physically hurt him, like he couldn't bear the idea of Annie forgetting him. Did it work? He asked, his voice choked. Did fucking that random guy at that party help you forget me? Annie's hand cracked across Mac's cheeks so fast it surprised them both. They stood there in shocked silence, her hand stinging from the impact, both of them breathless, like they'd just run a marathon. She'd hit him. She'd never hit another person in her entire life. Yet one more example of Mac making her do things she would never ordinarily do. First of all, she said, trying to regain her composure, he wasn't random. His name was Ryan, and we had class together, and he was nice to me. And second of all, it is none of your business who I fuck. She tossed the blanket she'd wrapped around herself, her anger enough to keep her warm now. How dare he? How dare he try and make her feel bad for that night? He had no right. Max stared at her, a hand on his cheek. His eyes were dark. I shouldn't have said that, he ground out, but it sure didn't take you long to move on. Annie crossed her arms over her chest. Ha! I waited a year for you, Mac, and then you didn't show. How long exactly should I have waited? Should I have forsaken all other men until you came back? Did you think you had some kind of claim on me because you took my virginity? He stepped closer, grabbing her arms in case she might hit him again. Of course I don't think that. Christ, Annie, I didn't take anything. But I thought you'd give me more than one chance. It felt like I made one mistake and you bailed. You could have called, you could have texted, but you didn't. I couldn't wait around for you any longer. She pulled out of his grasp. Maybe she would hit him again. Maybe he deserved it. Max slumped, the anger seeping out of him. You're right. I know you're right. But it still felt shitty seeing you with that guy. Kind of like how it feels when you bring random women to Christmas at Estelle's. Mac grumbled. Don't think I've forgotten about Trent from Friendsgiving. Trent was nice. Fuck Trent. Annie's laugh burst out unexpectedly, and Mac smiled. It's been a long time, Mac. We both know we've been with other people. I know. Talking about all this just brought back all those feelings, you know? Yeah, I know. I probably shouldn't have hit you. Max shrugged, a small smirk lifting the side of his mouth. I deserved it. Annie sighed, slouching back down onto the bed, the fight going out of her too. Anyway, it didn't work, she said. I couldn't forget you. Mac dropped to the floor in front of her, wedging his body between her thighs. She put a hand gently on the cheek she had smacked. I tried, she said. I wanted to, but I couldn't do it. She shook her head, biting back tears. And then you show up here and work your way into my life? What am I supposed to do? I tried to forget you too, he whispered, leaning toward her. Why didn't you come talk to me that night at the party? Max shook his head with a laugh. That would have gone a lot worse than this, he said. I have a feeling I would have won the fight against Ryan, but you definitely would have kicked my ass. Annie's laugh mixed with the tears falling down her cheeks. Mac wiped them away with his thumb, cupping her face in his hands. I'm sorry I stood you up that day. I shouldn't have left like that. But in my defense, I was young and stupid, and I ran away. I bartended in Maine, and I painted houses in Tulsa, and I mucked stalls on a ranch in Texas, and none of those places felt like home, and no other women I met felt like you. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, leaving the way I did. I needed time away from this place, Annie, but I never should have left you without talking to you. I was young, too. I'm not sure that's a very good defense, Annie whispered, leaning toward him until their foreheads touched. Max smirked, and Annie was close enough she could kiss him if she were braver. You were young, but not stupid. Standing you up was just one of the many stupid things I was up to that year. Really? What else you got? She said, smiling again. She couldn't seem to help it around Mac anymore. Well, he said, his smile growing to match hers, I got frostbite on my pinky because I was still refusing to wear warm gloves. That's ridiculous. I know. Then there was a time I drove a hitchhiker from Philly to D.C., and I was only about 75% sure he wasn't going to murder me. Annie gasped. That is seriously dangerous. That's kind of my point. Don't tell my mom. And then there's the tattoo I got. Annie raised an eyebrow. She'd never seen a tattoo on Mac before. What tattoo? It's on my ribcage, she said. Okay, so what is it? Plenty of people get tattoos, but do plenty of people get tattoos of the name of the person they had just unceremoniously ditched and were pretty sure hated them? You didn't. Mac leaned away from her and lifted his shirt. In tiny script on his left ribs was her name. It was so small she hadn't seen it last night when he undressed, but there it was, plain as day. Annie, in black ink under his heart. You did, she whispered, running a finger over the tattoo. Max squirmed under her touch. I did. See? Young and stupid. I wanted to keep you close even when I knew I didn't deserve to. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead into his chest. Oh, Max, she whispered, why is this so hard? It doesn't have to be. The first year I was away, I was scared and lonely. The second year, I did a lot of stupid shit to forget you. But after that, I really did figure some things out. I studied while I was out there, Annie. I worked a lot of places, always thinking about what I could bring back here. What would make my dad's place even better? That's great, Mac, really, but... He shook his head like he didn't want to hear what came after that, but... I know what I want now, Annie. Her phone rang, cutting him off. Shit, she said. The only way someone's calling me this early is for some kind of emergency. Maybe not, Max said, running his hands through her hair. Annie moaned. His fingers felt so damn good. Being near him felt so damn good. Maybe don't answer it. Maybe whoever it is can figure it out themselves. He held her gaze, his breath warm on her face. He dropped his shirt, but her hands remained under it, roving over the expanse of his skin. Maybe it doesn't have to be hard for us anymore, Annie, he said, and she wanted to believe him. He traced his nose along her cheek. The phone stopped and then started up again. She was sure something catastrophic was happening with either the wedding or the bakery or one of her nieces or nephews. I really have to answer that, she said. Max sighed, leaning his forehead against hers for one more breath before he pulled away. He looked like he wanted to say more, or maybe just to lean forward and kiss her, and God, Annie wanted him to, but... I'm sorry, she said, and Mac nodded as she screamed for her phone because he knew her. He knew she couldn't not answer. He knew she had to help, and that meant more to her than his apology. She mouthed sorry one more time, and Mac gave her a slow smile, and Annie briefly reconsidered her stance on answering the phone before picking up. She was who she was. Hello, she said, not recognizing the number. It was Estelle. Chapter 31 now. What do you mean she's in New Hampshire? Annie huffed, continuing her search for her clothes. Mac wouldn't mind if she stayed in his lacrosse t-shirt for the rest of forever, though, so he wasn't being particularly helpful. Getting dressed was the last thing he wanted Annie to do. He wanted her back in his bed. He wanted to do everything they hadn't last night. He wanted to kiss her, finally, again. They were so damn close. I mean, Estelle and Dot are in New Hampshire and they need a ride home. What the hell are they doing in New Hampshire? Annie tossed aside his pillows and found the shirt and bra she'd apparently tucked under there last night and held them up triumphantly. Your pants are still downstairs, he said with a smirk, and thanks to the fact that Annie had flung on the overhead lights as soon as she finished her phone call, Mac was treated to the sight of a delicious blush working its way up her neck and cheeks at the memory of what they'd done in his kitchen last night. He knew it was one he'd hold on to for a very long time. Right, she said, clearing her throat, tucking her clothes under one arm and marching out of his room like a woman on a mission. Mac grinned and followed her downstairs. Sure, he was pissed that their moment had gotten interrupted. He hadn't felt that close to Annie in over a decade, but there was something about seeing her in her element that also got him off. So, he'd have to take that for now. He found her in his kitchen, scooping her jeans up off the floor. Can you drive me home, she asked, turning to face him. I figure I have time for a quick shower before I drive up there to get them. Wait, you're going to drive up to New Hampshire alone today? Of course I am. On the day of the wedding, you've been helping to plan for months? Someone needs to go get them, and it can't be Logan or Jenny, obviously, so I'll do it. Estelle called me. I'll come with you. That's unnecessary. She didn't even pause, didn't take 1 second to consider that she didn't have to do this by herself, that she wasn't single-handedly responsible for her friend's happiness. Max stared her down. You have too much to do today, Annie, and your car is presumably buried under snow right now with an empty gas tank, so you can let me drive you around to do all the things I'm sure you have on your wedding day to-do list, or you can go attempt to dig your car out of the snow and add a drive to New Hampshire into everything else you have to do. You can't leave the kittens. The kittens will be fine. I'll put them in the bathroom with their cozy box and some food and water. They won't even miss us. Annie scowled, clearly dying to argue with him, but he knew he had her. There was no way in hell he was letting her out of his sight right now. Not when they were so close to fixing things between them. He leaves Annie alone for a few hours and she's right back to assuming he's plotting against her. No freaking way. When do you have to be back here to get your hair done? 2 o'clock, she said slowly, like she was suspicious of why he wanted to know. Okay, and what else is on your list for today? She was still looking at him like he was trying to get state secrets out of her, but she begrudgingly answered. I need to check in at the bakery. George is feeling better and is opening it up this morning, and I need to make sure the other wedding desserts are ready to go. Mac was sure George was capable of handling that himself, or that a quick call would do the trick, but he knew Annie needed to see it for herself. Okay, what else? I'm supposed to pick up the bouquets and boutonnieres. Hazel can do it. Annie paused like she didn't have a good reason to argue with him on that one. Good, he was making progress. We'll swing by your place for a change of clothes and then we'll go check in at the bakery. We should be able to get to Estelle and back before your hair appointment, if we hurry. Unless you want me to do your hair, he said with a wink, clearly joking. But Annie was staring at him like he'd grown another head. Why are you looking at me like that? It was a joke. Hairdressing is one of the few skills I don't have. She shook her head, still not laughing. I don't know. Didn't expect the help, I guess. Well, start expecting it. Tea or coffee, he said, leaving her standing there gaping while he went to the coffee maker. Coffee, she said, and when he turned back to look at her, she looked lost and a little confused, like she was reworking who he was again. But this wasn't anything new for Mac. This was who he was now. He was a man with a business and a house and a love for the woman standing in front of him that was too strong for him to ignore anymore. He was done with the childish games he and Annie had been playing for years, but he figured she'd need a minute to catch up. He made the coffee and then came over to Annie, taking the clothes from her hands and replacing them with a mug. You might as well stay in my clothes for now, he said, not able to resist the smirk on his face. You can grab fresh ones when we stop at your apartment. Again, the blush crawled up her cheeks, and Mac could think of a million other ways he'd rather spend the day when picking up Logan's missing grandmother, but he knew Annie would never let it go. If she wanted this day to be perfect for her friends, then so did he. But Logan owed him so much for this. At this point, he was basically the best groomsman ever. What was ice fishing with the bride's cousins compared with giving up sex with the woman of his dreams to go pick up 2 old ladies who'd gone rogue? He was kicking Noah's ass at this. Not that Noah knew they were competing, but Mac was totally winning best groomsman. Do you want to tell me where they are in New Hampshire? And why exactly did Logan's grandmother and Jenny's aunt take off to another state the day before their wedding? Annie blinked, coming back to the present moment and out of whatever memories of last night she'd been playing in her head. They're not that far, about an hour from here. Apparently they went up there to visit some distant cousin of Estelle's or something like that. She said they needed something for the wedding, and then they got stuck in the snow. Mac glanced out the window. It's not snowing now, he observed, still hoping for a last-minute reprieve from his errand. Annie looked so tempting sitting at his kitchen island, cradling her mug. He wanted her here every morning, just like this, talking over coffee as the sun came up outside. He wondered how she'd react if he said so. She'd probably tip right off the stool. Annie blew out a long sigh and took a sip of her coffee. They left their headlights on last night, and now the car battery is dead. And frankly, I don't trust those two to make it back in time for the wedding, not at this rate. They've proven to be entirely unreliable. Well, that settles it. We're taking a road trip to New Hampshire. Do you want a travel mug for that coffee? Because we should probably get a move on. We want to make it back in time. Annie was staring at him again like she was waiting for the real Mac to come back, like she was waiting for the irresponsible kid he was to walk through the door. Or maybe she was waiting for the guy she'd painted in her head all these years as the asshole that left her. But he wasn't either of those guys, and he had a new plan. He was determined to show Annie the man he was now, and she could decide for herself if she wanted to be with this Mac, because he'd already made up his mind. He loved Annie then, and he loved her now. She was it for him. Back at Annie's apartment, she was in the shower, and Mac was sprawled out on her bed, doing his best not to think about her in the shower. He'd suggested they shower together at his place to save time, but Annie had laughed in his face. So here he was in Annie's tiny apartment, forced to listen to the sounds of the water and try not to imagine Annie naked and soaking wet. So far, he wasn't doing a great job of it. He put his hands behind his head and closed his eyes. Maybe he could get a few more minutes of sleep before they embarked on this ridiculous journey. The shower turned off, and a few seconds later, the bathroom door opened. "Keep your eyes closed," Annie's voice washed over him. "Please tell me you're kidding." "I'm not kidding. I accidentally left my clothes out here. Keep your eyes closed." He heard her padding across the floor toward him, and he groaned. Clearly, he was being tested by Annie or by God. He wasn't sure, but his resolve to be a gentleman was rapidly weakening. He could hear Annie rifling through her clothes in the dresser right next to his head. "How about I open one eye?" he teased. "Don't you dare." "Or," he said, "I could keep my eyes closed and just use my hands." Annie snorted. "Yeah, that's not happening either." He was going to go on teasing her, but something about the fact that she trusted him to keep his eyes closed was more important. Progress. If Annie could trust him not to peek, then someday she could trust him with everything else. Unfortunately, his cock didn't care as much about gaining Annie's trust and was pushing painfully against the fly of his jeans. Between tasting Annie last night and now knowing she was just a foot away from him, completely naked, Mac wasn't sure he'd survive the day. And the sounds of her getting dressed were sexy. Was that the elastic of her absurdly tiny panties being pulled over her hips? The shush of her jeans as they were tugged up her long legs had him thinking about how it felt to feel them. Seeing her like that, God, he had dreamed about it for years, obsessed over this woman, and then there she was, bare in front of him, finally letting him lick and suck and worship her. It had been perfect, and he wanted more, and lying here not being able to touch her or look at her was absolute torture. She let out a small sigh. "Christ, Annie," he breathed, pressing his palm to his aching cock. Her sharp intake of breath skated over his skin, letting him know she'd noticed what he was doing. He could feel her standing over him, her gaze lighting him up. He pressed once more, savoring the sound of Annie's whimper. He was about to stop to say they needed to go, to apologize, but then he felt the mattress dip beside him. "Annie, what?" "Keep your eyes closed," she whispered. The feather-like touch of her fingers under his waistband nearly had his back bowing off the bed. "What are you doing?" he gasped. "What I should have done last night," she said, undoing his button. So businesslike, so Annie. He opened his eyes and found her leaning over him. "Eyes closed," she said. And there was something in her gaze. She sounded like her usual confident self, but he could see it in her eyes. She was nervous, uncertain. "Annie, you don't have to." "I want to," she said, holding his gaze. She lowered her voice. "Just close your eyes." This time he listened, but Mac had so many questions. He wanted to know why she wanted to do this. Had she forgiven him? Did she want to be with him, or was this just something she'd fantasized about over the years, like he had? Was she simply getting it out of her system, getting him out of her system? They needed to talk about all of it, but Annie was slowly sliding down his zipper, and all Mac wanted, all he could think about in that moment, was her mouth on him. Everything else could wait. The entire world could wait. Can I? She asked. Yes, he rasped, his voice stuck in his throat. Annie, He didn't know what he was going to say, but he felt like he had to say something until Annie cut him off. No, don't say anything, she said. Please just let me. She was hiding from him. Still, even after all he confessed this morning, she was still keeping her distance. But her hands were on him, her breath coming in short little gasps. And who was she? Who was he to deny her? So he let her. He let her wrap her hand around his aching erection. He let her slide her mouth around him. He let her cross another thing off the list of things he'd thought about over the last 11 years. Annie's mouth around him, her tongue sliding over his length, was as close to a religious experience as Mac had had in a long time. Her hair brushed along his lower abs, and he gathered it in his fist, making the ponytail she was so fond of wearing. He thought about how many times he'd resisted tugging it. He didn't resist now. He gave it a tug, gentle at first, and judging by the low hum Annie was making, she didn't mind at all. Her hair was like silk between his fingers, and he gave it another pull. Annie groaned, and the sound shot through him. He wasn't going to last long, but who would blame him? He was living out his teenage fantasies. This moment was everything he'd wanted all those years while he was on the road, or at least he thought it was all he wanted. But somehow it wasn't enough. He wanted to hold her and touch her and see her. Somehow, even as pleasure barreled through him, even as Annie's sweet mouth worked him to the best orgasm he'd had in years, Mac felt like he was missing out, like he wasn't getting all of Annie. And after all this time, he wanted everything. She sat back with a sigh, leaving Mac panting on the bed. You can clean up in the bathroom if you want, she said, but we should probably get going soon. His eyes sprung open. You're kidding, right? Annie blinked back at him. Her flushed cheeks and messy hair were the only evidence that anything had happened. Just seconds ago, his hands were in her hair, and her mouth was filled with him. I'm not kidding. You know we're on a tight deadline. He ran a hand down his face in frustration. So? We're just going to pretend this didn't happen? What the hell are we even doing, Annie? She sighed, standing up from the bed. I don't know, but maybe I'm not ready to forgive you yet. Well, this was a shitty way to come down from an orgasm. But I couldn't leave you like that all day, she added, gesturing toward his lap. You could thank me. Jesus, Annie, is this seriously how it's going to be between us? We don't have time to deal with this right now, she said, hand on her hip. She was trying to get back to business, but Max saw the fear in her eyes. She didn't want to get hurt again. Are you driving me, or should I get my shovel to dig out my car? He tucked himself back into his pants and stood up. I'm still driving you, he nearly growled, but this isn't over between us. I'm not letting it go this time. I'm not going to go from enemies to whatever this is. He gestured between them in some futile attempt to explain what they were to each other at the moment. Exes who now orally pleasured each other? Friends who gave each other orgasms every once in a while? He felt like he was losing his mind. A few days ago, Annie couldn't stand being in the same room with him. And then this morning, it seemed like maybe she was about to forgive him. And now, she was giving him blowjobs and trying to pretend it never happened. It was enough to make a man go crazy. And Annie ground out like he was being the unreasonable one. But we really need to go. There was clearly no point in arguing with her any further, so he used the bathroom, they grabbed their things, and headed for the door. But on the way out, he spotted something on Annie's refrigerator, an old postcard, one he recognized from the Grand Canyon. Wait a minute, he said, and Annie paused, glancing back at him. You kept it? He said. It is one of the later ones he'd sent her after he stood her up and went back out on the road. The Grand Canyon was supposed to be one of his original stops, one of the ones on the list they'd made at the diner. He never made it in that first year, but when he finally did, he felt like he should let Annie know. It had been the first time he'd reached back out to her, the first time he'd let himself admit that he missed her. He kept the message simple, something about the canyon being as cool as they thought it would be, and that he hoped she was well. She'd never written back, but she kept it. Annie's eyes flicked to the postcard and back to his face. Yeah, well, you got my name tattooed on you, so I guess we're both idiots, she said, heading out the door. Mac couldn't help but laugh. He took one last glance at the postcard before following Annie. Maybe there was still hope for them to get this right. Chapter 32, now. In the course of 3 hours this morning, Annie had hit a man and made the very questionable decision to engage in oral sex with him. And now she was stuck in his passenger seat trying to pretend neither of those things had happened. To his credit, he seemed to be doing the same. She shouldn't have done those things with anyone other than Mac, the man who seemed to be determined to make her act completely out of character. Why could she not keep her damn emotions in check around him? She'd spent the last 2 days wanting to murder him or mount him, and today had not provided any more clarity on which option she should choose. Sure, he'd apologized, but what the hell good did that do her now? She'd spent 10 years hating the man. Could she really change her feelings for him just like that? Maybe she should let it go. Maybe no one should be held responsible for things they did before their brain was fully formed. But every time she looked at him, she remembered how much it had hurt to sit alone in that diner. How was she supposed to forget about that feeling? The feeling of being abandoned by someone you considered a friend. Someone who was supposed to come back to you? She'd been so convinced he would, until he didn't. And then she was devastated. It was her deal breaker, and he knew it, and he broke it anyway. And then she'd gone and put his dick in her mouth. When had that ever helped anyone find clarity about their feelings? She was pretty sure never. Not that she hadn't enjoyed herself, because she definitely had. Mac had looked so delicious, so tortured lying on her bed, his cock straining against the front of his jeans. He looked like he was about to burst, all just from being in the same room as her while she was getting dressed. He hadn't even seen anything. She was sure of it. Just being near her had done that to him. She'd have to be dead inside to not find that incredibly hot. And besides, she couldn't have him driving her around all day with that erection between them. They'd never get anything accomplished. So really, the blowjob had been for practical purposes. Or that was what she chose to tell herself. The day was bright and sunny and nearly blinding, with the snow covering everything. Annie squinted out the window at the white fields and coated trees. She spotted a few cows, a farmhouse in the distance. It would be easier to enjoy the scenery if she wasn't so confused about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. 5 more exits to go, she said, breaking the silence they'd been driving in since they got in the car. Mac grunted. You'd think he'd be in a better mood after the whole getting off thing, but he'd been pouty during their stop at the bakery and for the first half of the drive. He was probably regretting the offer to chauffeur her around. In another first, she actually felt kind of bad about it. I bet you wish you had let me drive myself today, she said, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. He kept his eyes on the road, but she could see the slight shake of his head. I don't wish that at all. You could have fooled me. He blew out a long sigh like she was exhausting him. At some point, we're going to have to talk about it, Annie. All of it. Not today. You can't keep doing that. He actually sounded angry. He was mad at her. You can't keep stopping me from telling you how I feel, he went on. It's been hard enough these past 3 years, but now it's impossible. She opened her mouth to argue, but opted to pause instead. Is that what she'd been doing? Silencing him? Shutting him down at every turn? Of course it was, but she'd only been trying to protect herself. Ever since Mac came back to town, she'd either avoided him or picked fights with him. Even before he moved back, she refused to see him any time he'd been back home to visit his family. She kept busy. She told herself she didn't need to see him, didn't want to talk to him. It was all ancient history, anything to keep her actual feelings at bay. And now, here he was, forcing her to face them. Except now, for the first time, she saw that maybe she hadn't been fair to Mac. Maybe, by trying to protect herself, she'd been hurting him. And while they may have been the goal originally, she suddenly didn't want it to be. She didn't want to hurt Mac anymore. One more day, she said. 1 more day? He sounded ready to shut that idea down. She had never seen Mac at the end of his rope before, but apparently they'd finally gotten there. Yeah, 1 more day, just today, the wedding day. Let's get through today, and then I promise we'll talk about everything. She waited, holding her breath. She still didn't even know what she would say when they did talk, but she knew she owed it to him. She owed him at least the courtesy of telling him nothing was going to happen between them, if that was the case, instead of ambushing him with surprise blowjobs and telling him to shut up about it. It was possible that she'd been sending some mixed signals. Okay, I'll give you 1 more day, and then you're going to tell me where I stand with you because I can't play games anymore. Too old? She teased, desperately trying to get back on some familiar ground. Mac huffed a laugh. Too old to be chasing after a memory of you. I need the real thing. I need to know if we have any chance of working, or if it's finally time for me to let you go. Annie's breath caught. But I'll give you until tomorrow, he added, saving her from having to speak. She still didn't know what she would say, but she knew she didn't want Mac to let her go. And she knew it was about time she let him say his piece. Chapter 33, 3 years ago. Max stood outside of the brand new bakery on Main Street. It was only his second day back in Dream Harbor, but this was his most important stop. The shop looked good. Its big front window was filled with delicious-looking treats, and the bench out front made him want to sit and eat a cookie in the December sunshine. But he knew it was more simply an inviting store. It was a culmination of years of work. This bakery was the end product of Annie's determination, and she was so fucking proud and he was so fucking proud of her, so happy that she'd achieved what she wanted to all those years ago. He remembered it like it was yesterday, lying in his bed next to her, talking about what they wanted from life. Annie had gone out and got it, worked for it, earned it, and it was incredible, and it smelled delicious. He'd been standing outside for far too long now, indecision and nerves keeping him frozen to the spot. He caught a glimpse of Annie moving around inside, and his breath caught in his throat. She was the same, but different. Older, but still gorgeous, moving around with the same purpose she always did. He didn't know how she would react to him being back, but if they were going to live in the same town again, he had to face her. Might as well do it now. He pushed open the door to the shop, and a little bell tinkled overhead. "I'll be right with you," Annie said, not looking up from the tray she was sliding into the display case. Her voice was enough to send his heart racing. He'd waited so long to hear it again. Too long. He'd been a damn coward for too long. As much as he loved his years on the road, he never should have waited this long to talk to her, to apologize. At first, he thought it was best to try and forget her, to put distance between them so they could both move on. And then years had gone by and he hadn't known what to say or how to say it. He got the feeling she avoided him whenever he was back in town, and he convinced himself it was better that way. But he knew this, no matter where he had gone or who he had been with, he'd never been able to shake his feelings for Annie. He was done running from them. "Hey, Annabelle," he said, and Annie picked her head up so fast she hit it on the counter. "Ow!" she hissed, rubbing her head and standing up. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." She stared at him in disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" Mac's heart sank. He should have known this wouldn't be easy. "I'm moving back to town." "No, you're not," she said so firmly that Mac nearly laughed. "I am, actually. You can't. Annie, I'm pretty sure you don't have a say in that." She crossed her arms over her chest. "Well, I do have a say in who comes into my bakery, so you can get the fuck out." "Can I at least explain? I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Annie, come on." "Don't Annie come on me. I haven't seen you in 8 years, Macaulay Sullivan." "I tried to see you." He had tried several times over the past few years. He'd stopped by her parents' house. Conveniently, she'd never been around, and no one had known where to find her. It was like she disappeared any time he came back to Dream Harbor, or her friends and family were instructed to make him think she had. Annie scuffed. "Look, we don't need a big reunion moment. You're moving back to town. That's lovely for you, but I don't need to interact with you, so please leave." "I'm sorry for everything." Annie put her hands on the counter and leaned toward him. "I don't need or want your apology. We were children, and it was just a silly fling between us." Max swallowed hard. He understood her anger, but she couldn't erase what happened between them. It had been extraordinary. He hadn't found anything like it since. There was nothing silly about it, he ground out. Annie shrugged like none of it really mattered to her. She should have punched him in the face. It would have hurt less. "I guess it meant more to you than it did me," she said, her words cutting him to the bone. A small part of him was glad. If she had welcomed him with open arms, he wouldn't have trusted it. "You don't mean that, Annabelle." "Don't fucking call me that." "Sorry." She stared at him from across the counter. Those same blue eyes that had once looked at him so lovingly were staring daggers. "Look," she said, "I've already forgotten about what happened between us, and I don't need you coming here to my town and dredging it all back up again. So, as far as anyone's concerned, I don't like you, Macaulay Sullivan. I never have, and I never will." He nodded, swallowing everything else he wanted to say to her, everything he'd never confessed. Clearly, she didn't want to hear it, and she didn't owe him anything. She didn't owe him forgiveness, not after the way he treated her. "Right," he said. "I'm sorry I came in." He turned to go, but looked back one more time. "The bakery looks really great. You did an amazing job." And for a brief second, Annie's expression softened, a tiny glimmer of the way she used to look at him before she shuttered it again with a scowl. The Annie he'd known all those years ago was gone. This Annie wasn't his anymore. This was the Annie he'd hurt. Now he had to figure out how to live in the same town as her and not lose his mind pining after her. Because while Annie wasn't his anymore, he would always be. Aw. Okay, one more chapter. Chapter 34 now. Okay, chapter 34 now. About a half an hour later, they pulled up in front of an unassuming ranch-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac in a town Annie had never heard of. The mailbox was in the shape of a largemouth bass. "Where the hell are we?" Mac muttered from the driver's seat. "We are at the address Estelle gave me this morning, the home of her cousin Sylvia, and those two runaways better still be here," Annie said, hopping down from the truck. Mac did the same, and they made their way down the uncleared path to the door. Icy snow crunched beneath their boots. There was a festive wreath on the door and a welcome mat that read, "Happy Holidays." Annie found that encouraging. Someone was in there, and they'd at least been around recently enough to decorate for Christmas. She rang the bell and they waited, crammed together on the small landing at the top of the cement stairs. Max smelled like spiced sex appeal and mixed emotions. It was wildly distracting. "Nobody's coming," he hissed. "They'll come," she insisted. "This is where they said they would be. They better come." She did not have time to go searching any more small towns today. She rang the bell again. Mac glared at the door like maybe they would make it open sooner. Finally, it opened and revealed a very small, very old woman on the other side. "Hello," Annie said. "Are you Sylvia? We're here to pick up Estelle and Dot." The woman blinked. Dear God, she better know where they are. "What was that, dear?" she said, cocking her head. "Estelle and Dot, are they here?" Mac yelled loud enough that Annie was sure half the neighborhood knew who they were looking for. She jabbed him in the arm with her elbow. He jabbed her back while continuing to smile at the old lady. The woman's face lit up. "Oh, yes, they're here. Come on in." She opened the door and Annie breathed a sigh of relief before following her into the house. If Estelle hadn't been here, she seriously didn't know what she would have done. Besides, put out a missing persons report and possibly find another woman to dress up as Nana for the wedding. Maybe Logan would never have noticed. "I was worried you were those terrible people that are always trying to get me to join their cult," Sylvia said with a cheerful smile as she led them through her house. "Oh, yikes," was all Annie could think to say. Mac chuckled from behind her. "Estelle's lucky I let her stay the night," Sylvia went on. Her pace was a slow shuffle, and they hadn't made it past the incredible floral sitting room yet. "You know, her father and mine had a horrible falling out. Years ago, that was." "Probably sometime in the 1800s, Mac muttered, and Annie tried to jab him again, but he was ready for it and dodged her. "But I couldn't very well put her out in the snow. Plus, she brought her lovely friend, Dot, so here we are." "That was very charitable of you," Annie said, and Sylvia beamed at her. They found the missing woman in a bright sunroom in the back of the house. "There they are," Sylvia announced. "You better not have taken anything while I was gone," she said, shooting Estelle a glare. "There's nothing here to steal," Estelle said, glaring right back. Dot at least had the courtesy to greet Annie and Mac. "We are so sorry you had to come all this way to get us. It's my fault. I left the headlights on when we got here." She got up from her seat on the white wicker furniture where an ancient-looking dog was snoozing next to her. She gave Annie a big hug. "It's no problem at all," Annie chirped, even though the whole thing had been a rather large problem. "We were just worried about you." "I told Henry where we were going," Estelle said. "That man never listens." "Can I get you something to drink?" Sylvia asked, directing her question to Mac. She looked extra tiny standing beside him, her head barely coming up to his bicep. "No, I'm all right, thanks. We really need to get back on the road." "You sure? Such a tall drink of water like you must be thirsty or hungry. I could get you some cookies." Estelle scuffed from her perch on a rocking chair in the corner. "Cookies? Is that what you're calling those dry bricks you tried serving us?" "See, this is the sort of behavior her branch of the family is known for." Sylvia wrapped a hand around Mac's arm. "You remind me of my dead husband," she said, gazing up at him. He looked to Annie for help, but she was still too busy trying to figure out what the hell was going on and why they were all here. "Well, if you finished your business, Estelle, we really do need to get back so we're not late for the wedding." She wanted to scream. "You know, the wedding for your one and only grandson, who you raised and who loves you more than anything, that wedding?" But she kept the smile pinned to her face and avoided Mac's panicked stare as Sylvia tucked herself closer into his side, although she fully intended to tease him about his new girlfriend later. "We'll be done with our business as soon as Sylvia forks over my rightful property." Your property? How dare you? Sylvia said, trembling with anger. She kept her grip on Mac's arm as she spoke. That heirloom has been in our family for generations, and it's as much mine as it is his. Estelle huffed, rising from her chair. Be that as it may, I have a grandson who needs it, and you don't. Just because my grandkids didn't want it doesn't mean I should pass it on to you after you come storming in here like you own the place. They've been having this argument since we got here, Dot whispered to Annie. I really don't know what I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I agreed to drive her here. I thought it was a simple errand to pick up something for the wedding. She duped you, Annie whispered back. Totally. I've been calling you for months, Estelle went on. You could have gotten it to me weeks ago and we wouldn't be in this situation. Sylvia shrugged. I didn't get your messages. Ha, Estelle said, coming closer. Like my father always said, your family is full of liars. Sylvia gasped, and Annie felt like she was a side character on a daytime soap opera. Max shifted so he was in between the two cousins. If he had to break up a fight between these senior ladies, Annie would lose it. That definitely wasn't on her wedding bingo card. Ladies, Max said, flashing his most charming smile, I'm sure we can figure this out. We're all mature adults here, right? He winked at Sylvia. She giggled. Okay, so maybe he was a really good groomsman. Annie had to give him that. Sylvia blushed, patting a hand to her white curls. Well, maybe we could figure something out, she said. You come with me. She took Mac by the hand and led him out of the room. He glanced back once, his eyes wide, and Annie shrugged and wiggled her fingers in a wave goodbye. If he wanted to play the charmer, this was what he got. I really am sorry about all this, Dot said again, but Estelle was still fuming. It's not our fault the old wretch won't give me what's mine. Annie patted her shoulder. I'm sure we'll get it, and we'll be back in plenty of time for the wedding, okay? Everything's going to be fine. The old dog let out a long sigh. Annie felt the same way. What is this heirloom anyway, and why is it so important? She asked while they waited for Mac and Sylvia to return. It's good luck, Estelle said. It's been in my family for years, and every bride that's worn it on her wedding night has had a long and happy marriage, so it's important I had to come get it. I'm sure Jenny and Logan will have a long and happy marriage no matter what, Dot said. Well, I'd like to have a little extra insurance. Did you wear it? Annie asked, still wondering what the heck they were talking about. Jenny already had her dress and shoes and jewelry for the day. What else was there? I didn't get to wear it, Estelle said, because Sylvia claimed she lost it after her wedding. I didn't push it at the time, but Logan's too important to me for him to not have it for his bride. If Annie disregarded how this whole thing had upended her day and threatened the wedding, then she could almost see how it was a loving gesture from a grandmother to the grandson she'd raised. Almost. We're back, Sylvia said, shuffling into the room. She had a wrapped parcel under one arm and Mac's hand in hers. I'm only giving this to you because Dot has been a lovely guest and Mac here really made my day. If it had been only you on my doorstep, I would have left you outside. Estelle huffed and held out her hand. Just give it to me already. Estelle, Annie hissed, be nice. Maybe if she had been nice from the start, this whole thing wouldn't have happened, but Annie kept the part to herself. She didn't know what history these two old women had, but she was not about to get into it right now. Estelle rolled her eyes like a teenager, but she cleared her throat and tried again. Please, may we have the package so we can be on our way? Sylvia hesitated, but then handed it over, and Annie breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you for your hospitality, Dot said, leaning down to give the woman a hug. You can come back any time, Sylvia said, patting her on the back. And that goes for you, too, she said, looking up at Mac. He leaned down and she gave him a little peck on the cheek. Thanks, Sylvia. We really appreciate your help, he said, giving her hand one more squeeze. Okay, gang, we've got a wedding to get to, Annie said, herding everyone out of the house. The dog finally woke up and barked as they closed the door behind them. They all piled into Mac's enormous SUV truck thing, and before they were even back on the highway, Annie had to know. So what is it? She asked. Estelle unwrapped the package and held up some sort of fabric or garment. Annie still wasn't sure what she was looking at. She turned around so she could get a better look at it. But what is it? It's a nightgown, the old woman replied, and Annie nearly choked on her spit. It was a nightgown that was probably older than the country itself. The material was yellowed and had long sleeves and a high neck and would probably reach down to Jenny's ankles. It was an actual nightmare. It was what an angry ghost would wear while haunting an old Victorian manor. Wow, was all Annie could reply. She couldn't meet Dot's eyes as she was currently very clearly trying not to laugh. You want Jenny to wear that tonight? Of course, Estelle said, and if she does, she and Logan will have a long and happy marriage, guaranteed. She beamed, and Annie had to turn around before she started laughing. She could see Dot's shoulders beginning to shake. They had come all this way to retrieve an ancient nightie. Annie was pretty sure that if Jenny did wear it, the thing would disintegrate as soon as Logan touched her. The thought had her snorting as she tried to stifle her laughter. Wait a minute, Max said, slowly piecing things together from his position in the driver's seat. Did we just drive to New Hampshire to pick up some magic, old-timey lingerie? That was when Annie and Dot completely lost it, descending into hysterical giggles. Even Estelle started to chuckle. I guess I forgot how old it was, she said. I'm not sure it's going to hold up to another wedding night. The group laughed even harder at that. Annie was doubled over in the passenger seat, her sides aching. Can I please be there when you give it to them? She asked between giggles. I can't wait to see the look on Logan's face when he sees it. Jenny's so sweet, she'll probably pretend she likes it, Max said, and the group broke down again. My God, this is insane, Annie said, wiping the tears from her eyes. It really did seem like a good idea at the time, Estelle said. Dot patted her on the shoulder. It was a lovely idea. I'm sure Logan and Jenny will appreciate the gesture. Yeah, and silver lining, Mac almost got a girlfriend out of the deal, Annie said. Sylvia was a very handsome woman, he said, straight-faced, although I didn't love the part where she wanted to tell me how loving her dead husband used to be. Annie giggled. Big shoes to fill, she said, nudging Mac's arm where it rested on the center console. He shook his head and smiled at her. I'm not sure I could keep up with Sylvia, that's for sure. It was suddenly quiet in the back seat, and Annie glanced back. Dot smiled. What's going on between you two? Something's different. Nothing's different, Annie snapped. No. Dot shook her head. Something's definitely different. Her eyes lit up. You two finally had sex, didn't you? Thank God, Estelle said, rolling her eyes. Wait, what? What day is it? I might have won the pool. Annie's face flushed hot. She couldn't believe she had to have this conversation while trapped in a vehicle with Mac. We didn't have sex. Everything is the same between us. Nothing is going on, okay? Both women looked at her like they didn't believe a single word she was saying. Now, Annie, that's not entirely true, Mac's voice was teasing and devious. He wouldn't. Don't you dare, she said. He held her gaze for a second before turning his eyes back to the road. Oh, that's right. I forgot I gave you one more day. One more day for what? Estelle piped up. One more day to keep pretending there's nothing going on between us, he said, and Annie smacked him hard on the shoulder. Oops, he said with a chuckle. Did I say too much? I knew it, Dot said triumphantly, sitting back in her seat. I can always sense these things. Annie wanted to point out that the woman hadn't known when one of her employees had a decades-long crush on her, but unfortunately she had been taught to respect her elders. Wait, did I win the bet or not? Estelle asked. You didn't win, Annie said, eyes straight ahead on the road. Nobody won. Ain't that the truth? Mac muttered from beside her, and at this point Annie didn't know what winning looked like anymore. Okay, we're going to leave off on chapter 35, page 303. Guys, this is the wedding. We only have 58 more pages. Thank you guys again for being here. And I know this is not my usual, but it gets loud inside and the kids are out for Thanksgiving break. So I'm going to do it again tomorrow while the youngest is at his therapy, and then that'll be fine. And I'll probably be able to finish it tomorrow, and then we'll talk about the next book. But thank you guys again for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Make sure you please share these videos. And I have a whole playlist of other books that I've read, so go through those. I read I believe it was the second or third one of these too. So read that along with me. And then I have some other good ones. The Magic Bookshop, that was really good. But I think the next one's going to be one of the Hallmark ones I got at Dollar Tree. I just have to figure out which one. But thank you guys. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Make sure you are subscribed, you like or dislike this video if you didn't like it. I don't know. Comment down below something. Whatever you want. Maybe an emoji, a winter emoji. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. And if you want to be annoyed with my shorts that I post, hit the bell notification so you guys are notified when I post new videos. And again, thank you guys for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.